This is a paper that I gave at the Oklahoma Archaeology Conference a few weeks ago, back before the quarantine was all in effect. It's a paper on two of my sites in Portugal, a place called Caladinho and another one called Santa Susana. The material that I'll be talking about today are the pottery primarily, but I am also going to show you the images of the two sites and explain what they are in like their excavation histories in basic detail and what these sites are. And then we'll use the two different ceramics assemblages, two different pottery assemblages to talk about issues of identity and the ancient economy in this very faraway part of the Roman Empire. So hang on to your hats. It's going to be exciting. All right, well, I've got my coffee and I have my slides, so at least that's normal, and we can get started. So where we're going to be focusing is here in the ancient Mediterranean. I'm going to take you, if you look on the left side of the map, there's a region called Lusitania, and we're going to be right smack in the middle of Lusitania. In this part that is today called the Central Alentejo. The Alentejo region is a very remote and rural border region of Portugal, right smack on the border with Spain. It has never been very densely populated, and today it's in fact probably less populated than it was in the Roman period. It is named because the Alentejo means beyond the Tejo, or the Romans called it the Tagus, which is a major river in Portugal that goes through the center of the country and all the way to Lisbon, to the capital on the coast. I mean, it kind of divides the country into what is beyond the Tejo and what is on the Tejo and what is north of it. The Alentejo is the region to the south and to the east of the Tejo River. The two sites I'm going to be telling you about today are both located in the central Alentejan region. The first one is a watchtower called Caladinho that we excavated between 2010 and this last summer. It is almost and completely excavated. We have done a good deal of the site and in the associated areas around it. I wrote my dissertation on this site and its interpretation as a watchtower. The second site is a much larger excavation. It is a much larger site, a Roman villa site. So this is a huge agricultural estate, probably run by slaves, although there is a very wealthy house on it too, probably the house of the landowner. It includes a bath complex that we've excavated part of, and also industrial spaces, and in the back is like the early colonial villa, like the very first house that was established, and that was later converted into, I think, an industrial space and storage space as well. So we're going to look at the artifacts that come out of that domestic space, primarily in the back of the site. That was eventually turned into a storage space. We've excavated there from 2013 on to the present, and we'll probably return there in 2021. Okay, so Caladinho. Caladinho is located where that arrow is pointing on our map here. This is the map you're seeing is a digital elevation map, so you're looking at the topography of the central Alentejo. The site of Caladinho is located on a ridge that is south of a mountain called the Serra d'Alça, and it's located in this set of lines of these different little forts. Caladinho is only one of the little fortified towers in the area. There are about 26 of them. Each of these is positioned along a route that of movement throughout the territory. So what I think is going on is these towers are being used kind of like forward operating bases, and that they are being used to claim territory and to control movement and trade and transport through it. It's part of this Roman colonization of the area, trying to pacify it and then take the land from the natives. Exactly who was living at Caladinho is an open question, but I believe it was probably either elements of the Roman military, maybe some new settlers, or maybe most likely local collaborators working with the Roman administration of the province. We know from ancient texts that there are maybe some references to sites like Caledonium. This is a text written by maybe one of Julius Caesar's lieutenants. We don't know his name, but or really the real name of the author, I should say. We do know the name of the lieutenant that helped Julius Caesar. Some people assign this text to Julius Caesar, and for a long time it was part of his own correspondence, but it is not nearly as well written as Caesar's other works. So this is almost certainly not Julius Caesar writing, but maybe one of the soldiers who served with Caesar in his wars in Spain. So what this author says is that in this place, right, this far off part of Spain, this very remote part of Spain, he says, here, also on account of the frequent raids of the natives, every place which is far removed from a town is held by towers and fortifications. Just like in Africa, they are covered with loose stone rather than tiles. Like he's commenting on the nature of the construction there, that's not Roman-style construction. They don't use tiles. And likewise, they have watchtowers in these places. On an account of their height, they surveil far and wide. So this is probably talking about the kind of tower that we're seeing at Caledonium. This is our excavation at Caledonium as of 2013. The plan hasn't really changed much since then, although that dotted line you see on the right, or the unfilled line you see on the right, we have filled that in, so we know the remainder of that structure. What we see on the left is the tower itself, and then the rest of it in the center, and on the right-hand side, that is all different domestic spaces and maybe an industrial space. The far right section there, we think, was probably a metallurgical shop made for making iron or even bronze tools. Caledonium, you can see it from the air. This is some of our aerial photos of it to give you a sense of where it is situated and what it looks like. The tower itself was probably originally as tall as that large outcrop of stone you see there on the kind of center left part of the frame. And from above, this is our newly excavated part. You can't really see it because of the tree, but in the of that rectangular room in the bottom right-hand side, that's where you have a metallurgical furnace, we think. Inside the tower at Caledonium, we found a good deal of artifacts, many of them well preserved, and because when the tower collapsed, it sealed off the contents inside. And this is a photo of one of those storerooms inside the tower that was right underneath a staircase. And when the tower fell in, the stairs fell on top of it, preserving a good deal of the material. One of the things I'd point out here on the photo with that arrow is an Italian style. We know this is an Italian style baking tray because it's shaped like all the other ones used in Roman Italy and elsewhere the Romans went in this late Republican period, the first century BC. It's a flat-bottomed, high-walled baking pan. Maybe you might even call it a frying pan. These baking trays, frying pans like this are very common on Roman sites and are often one of those markers of Roman-style cuisine. And here one is here at Caledonium. We can use artifacts, too, to talk about the dating of the site, and that's what a lot of our work at Caledonium was originally dedicated for, is establishing the date of it. One of our best ways of dating the site is by these stamps on Roman pottery. This one here, which you can see on this red terra sigillata plate, has a stamp of Doreus. You see the D, the A, and the R. The E is missing except for a little bit of the bottom there, and then a U and an S, although Roman U's, of course, look like V's, but that's Doreus. We know that the workshop of Doreus was producing probably in Lyon, in France, probably producing between 30 to 20 BC. So that gives us a really tight chronology for this artifact's production and then its use afterwards. So likely this was brought to Caledonium by Roman importers, maybe even came with the Roman army and found its way here to the tower somewhere after 30 to 20 BC, where it was used and eventually discarded. Other datable artifacts from Caledonio include about 120, 123 different pieces of pottery and 4 coins. When taken together, they give us a median date of the occupation of Caledonio of about 13 CE. This is one of the things that's very valuable that you can do with artifact analysis, is that you can collect all the datable materials, all the datable objects, right, and assign them a percentage of when they could occur. So if an object has a chronology of 100 years, then it has a 10% chance of being produced and used within any decade of that 100 years. So 10 for a thing with a 10-year production, 100-year production could be produced, a 1% chance produced in any one of those years in that 100-year span. So obviously when something has a longer or shorter chronology, you have to change that percentage. But when you calculate all the percentages of all the datable objects together, you get a probable chronology. And that's what you're seeing here, is the probable chronology of all the datable objects from Caledonio. If you take all the datable objects whose probable chronology is over a century, so every object that has a chronological range of more than 100 years, we narrow it down further. So that this is our much more precisely datable objects. From that, we only have 43 of those, and 4 coins, because coins are really datable. Roman coins give us really good dates. With those 43 objects, we're able to really narrow the occupation of Caledonio, and it shows us the site was occupied for probably not more than about 50 years, starting somewhere around 30 BC and ending somewhere around 20 CE, or BCE CE. It also changes our median date from 13 CE to 13 BCE, pushing back that occupation a bit further. This is one that I think is quite a bit more reliable because the chronology is much tighter. So I think that this probable occupational chronology at Caledonio is a bit more trustworthy. This has this graph has greatly informed our interpretation of the site, because it puts Caledonio right smack in the middle of the Roman reorganization of this region under the Emperor Augustus, and maybe even beginning a bit earlier on under the administration of Julius Caesar. And that really situates Caledonio at that colonial moment when you get new settlers arriving and claiming territory, and in this case building these watchtowers from which they can surveil and protect and take the land from natives who otherwise might resist. Right? They can let them know they're being watched. Our other site, located near Caledonio, is a place called Santa Susana. You can see Santa Susana kind of in the middle here. I'll see if I can get the mouse around it. This is Santa Susana at a church called the Igreja de Santa Susana. We chose to excavate at Santa Susana because we wanted to see what happened after the towers like Caledonio were abandoned. And Santa Susana, as a Roman villa, we assumed was built after Caledonio and the other towers, right? Once the land has been pacified, the indigenous population pushed out, the land could be claimed, reorganized, and then settled in the Roman way. That doesn't mean that indigenous people aren't living here anymore. It just means that they're going to be living under a new political and social regime, and an economic regime as well. Santa Susana is also a very convenient site, is also the reason we chose to excavate it. There is a villa much closer to Caledonio that I suspect was where the inhabitants of Caledonio moved. Once the watchtower was no longer needed, they just moved down slope into one of these big Roman villas. But we don't have access to the remains of that villa today. The landowner is a bit difficult to work with, and so we chose a different villa in the same region to answer these similar questions. Santa Susana is located on a floodplain with some arroyos, what we would call them in America. These are seasonal washes, seasonal streams. They're not ever any like raging rivers, but they do provide ample supply of water for agriculture in the region. Santa Susana is probably one of about a dozen different Roman villas established in the central Alentejo, and especially around the area of Caladinho and those other small little forts and watchtowers. And it is established, probably we suspect, as part of this new colonial industry of producing cash crops like olive oil and wine for export into the wider Mediterranean. So knowing that Santa Susana is built to export agricultural products, we might expect to find at Santa Susana a greater number of imported objects, right? Roman stuff from outside this region or even outside the peninsula. Because Caladinho, we might assume, it's a poor watchtower. This is not a wealthy agricultural villa. So it wouldn't or shouldn't have as many imported Roman objects. I mean, if you're colonizing a region, you may not have access to that larger economy outside that region. That's what we might expect. Well, at Santa Susana, this is an aerial view of Santa Susana, so you get a modern house. That's the building in the middle of the frame. On the left-hand side is a modern cemetery, and on the right side is a 16th to 17th century church that gives the site its name. You can see where we've excavated from this aerial photograph down south of the house in the center. That's where the bath complex is, and then right above the house in the center, that is where we have our industrial space / storage space that was converted over from originally what we think was the early house, the first colonial house. So if we're looking at questions of that really early occupation, that Roman reorganization and how it transformed into this new agricultural economy from the indigenous one, that's where we want to look at, is that early Roman house. So here we have the bath complex in the front. We have some nice mosaics. They're all very pretty, but that's not the point of this paper. They're very pretty paper, very pretty mosaics. Okay. We also found some objects like this that I think I've shown you before and talked about. This is that brick with the child's footprint and the doodles on it. Probably one of my favorite artifacts. Moving on to the back of the house, though, is where I really want to focus, and I want to look at the materials coming from here. This part was built not out of unmortared rocks and stone. The walls that it's made out of are built not in a Roman way. They're not mixed with concrete to hold them up. It's a kind of construction that the Portuguese call taipa, where it's just packed earth around a stone wall. It's fairly sturdy. You can still build this way. It still holds up, but it certainly isn't the solidly built concrete-based Roman construction that you might be used to. The site itself has been here in the back. We tried to excavate a kind of a large part. It does have some definite Roman style construction, but none of it is mortared, which we think is pretty odd. You might notice here we've got this collection of stones kind of in this plus sign shape. There's another one there, another one over here, and then there's one here. We're missing one here in the middle, though. I think that was actually robbed out, and it's now part of the modern house. But this, we think, are the bases for a colonnade, a bunch of columns that were set up, making this a kind of outdoor porch space. At Santa Susana, we have 220 different datable materials, including 21 coins, and it gives us a much later median date. But again, if we take that probable chronology and we remove all the objects that have a chronology of over a century, it changes the look of it slightly. It narrows it down, makes it more precise. So we get this. We get a site that was established probably around 25 to 50 AD or CE. that has almost 2 centuries of occupation before there seems to be a decline in the 3rd century, which is, we see that all across the Roman world. We call that the crisis of the 3rd century. Things are kind of falling apart all over the Roman world. And then in the 4th century, it rebounds, and we have our next primary phase of occupation. This matches up really well with what we're seeing at Santa Susana in terms of just the nature of the architecture at the site and where things are being built. That in the 3rd century we really do have have this decline in the site, and maybe it was even partially abandoned. That first spike, though, the early occupation, is what I'm most interested in, because that represents that occupation right after or around the same time that Caladinho is falling out of use and being abandoned. We get this new villa built. At both of these sites, we found roughly about 25,000 different pieces of pottery. So taken together, about a little over 25,000 pieces of pottery. Analyzing that pottery has taken quite a long time, and that's mostly what my research is on. These assemblages, we've identified lots of imported wares, lots of especially Roman transport amphorae, those are the shipping containers, as well as fine tablewares like that bright red plate fragment I showed you with Duraeus on it. That is an imported tableware. It comes from Italy, called Italian sigillata. We know that many of these objects were produced in Italy or in the Iberian Peninsula, possibly also a few in North Africa and southern France. And we know, too, that they're making a lot of imitations of these, especially at Caladinho, local imitations of things they couldn't otherwise get. And when we look at not the imported stuff, but the locally produced stuff, like that flat-bottomed, high-walled baking tray frying pan from Caladinho, we also see that they are characteristically Roman in style. So, if we break down our functional groups. So a functional group is, for pottery, is what you can identify the function of that ceramic sherd. When we break those down, we get percentages like this. So fine tablewares, things you eat out of, lamps, that's like a Roman light bulb, a lamp. Common wares, those are vessels with no other distinguishing characteristic. They are just a normal pot. So that's kind of a catch-all category used for things that you can't put elsewhere. Mortaria are grinding bowls. Those are really common on Roman sites. Cooking vessels come in a lot of variety of forms we'll talk about in a little bit. And those transport vessels, those are your amphorae. When we break those up at Santa Susana, we get a pretty standard distribution, right? You have a lot of locally produced common wares. You have just by count, you have about 6% of the assemblages lamps, 20% is fine ware, 10% cooking ware, and 11% are transport. So it's pretty well distributed, although some of these percentages might be a bit low. Compare Santa Susana's functional groups. That's the overall bit of the site, and this is the that really early occupation, so that early villa, which is quite a bit different. So compare Santa Susana overall with just the early occupation. 20% fine ware overall, but in the very early stage, very little, 1.5% fine ware, almost no lamps. Locally produced common wares and storage wares just dominate the assemblage. Right? There's cooking wares are almost the same at around 8.7 or as opposed to 9.7%, but transport ware is way down too. So what we're seeing is that the early occupation, that's what we're seeing here at Sector C, the early occupation is far less connected to the wider Mediterranean economy than the site overall. Okay, so that makes sense, but how does it compare maybe to Caladinho? Caladinho's functional groups, remember Caladinho is at just roughly the same time as Santa Susana, maybe 50 years earlier, right? And it has a very different shape to its to its functional groups. Fine wares, right? We have 2% rather than 1.5% fine wares. Already, that's a major jump in the connectedness to the outside world. You get lots of locally produced common and storage wares, but again, it's actually significantly lower, right? Almost, well, over 20% less locally produced common ware, right? And quite a bit more storage, maybe because they're having to worry about keeping water on top of the hill at Caledinio. The cooking wares you see on the right are about the same as we get at Santa Susana, like a percentage point away. But the transport pottery is really what I want to focus on here. Because that transport pots, those shipping containers, those come from outside the region. Those are definitely imported. And these transport pottery at Caledinio is 4.5% compared to not even 2% at Santa Susana. That tells us that Caledinio, despite being a poor, isolated watchtower, is somehow more connected to the wider Roman economy, that Mediterranean economy, and all the goods that are shipped to it, then through it, it's a sea, than this early Roman villa established after Caledinio. That's kind of counterintuitive. Something's going on. We know that at Caledinio we get some of the very earliest phases of locally produced amphorae, like these ovoid amphorae here. And at Caledinio we can divide up the amphorae quite a bit, showing us that almost all the amphorae are produced in the peninsula, either around Lisbon, that's a Lusitanian one, or in southern Spain, that's the Baedecan ones. The few that are not are locally produced imitations, those Alentejan amphorae, which is a weird thing to produce anyway in a region that doesn't have a lot of water for shipping. These are shipping containers. They're meant to be in the holds of ships, and yet they're producing local imitations here at Caledinio. They really want to have Roman-style things, is what this is telling us. This is one of the baking trays from Caledinio that we saw a bit earlier. This one now in the midst of its reconstruction. You can see its different bits and pieces there. It is this thing here on the bottom, or a similar version to it, this frying pan baking tray. This is very, very common part of Roman cookware in the by the late 1st century BC. So there's that globular pot and that casserole. These are early Roman cookwares. By the late 1st century BC and then 1st century AD under the Emperor Augustus, in Italy, in the empire's heartlands, you see a shift away from this old-style cooking to cooking in things like this. These are baking covers, climani. These are common in the early Roman Empire, and they're going to be what replaces those flat-bottom trays and pans. This is how you cook in one. You can either stack it with coals and have it on kind of a bottom dish, or you can just put the klibanis over a loaf of bread and put coals around it to bake in. It's a pretty versatile object and also pretty portable. It's what you can cook in this even if you don't otherwise have a kitchen at home, which most Romans did not. So these kind of cooking wares we see at Caledinio include those baking trays and pans, right, and the baking covers too. Those make up together about 3% of the assemblage by count. We see those casseroles. That's going to be the baking trays and pans make up about almost 3% by count. The casseroles too are almost 1%, and those big globular cooking pots, those big stew pots, those are about 15%. Compare that to the baking covers. Those baking covers are that new invention. And at Caledinio, although it's right at the right time for them to appear, to start becoming popular, the people at Caledinio seem to hold on to the old cuisine, the old Roman-style cuisine. At Santa Susana, we see a bit of a change. We do see that they are interested in the new style of cooking. Yes, they have baking trays. Yes, they have pots. Yes, they have casseroles. But notice how many more of those baking covers, the clibani, are at Santa Susana compared to Caladino. Like, that's 2% of the assemblage compared to 0.3% of the assemblage. So the people at Santa Susana are clearly interested in Roman style, the new Roman style of cooking, more so maybe than their predecessors at Caladino. That in spite of Santa Susana's apparent lack of connection with the Roman economy. So what in the world is going on here? Caladino appears to have a greater connection with that wider Mediterranean world and with the what it means to be part of that Roman economy. And we might think that's because it has the connection with the Roman military, that it's the Roman army that's imported these things, and then they are trickling down to the inhabitants at Caladino. Santa Susana, on the other hand, that early villa, maybe it had so few imported goods because it was self-sufficient, because it didn't need those things to the same degree that the inhabitants at Caladino did. That Santa Susana is in fact built for export, that it's not necessarily importing from the Roman world, that it's exporting cash crops, and then those cash crops are going to enrich its owner who lives elsewhere. Still, though, it's the lack of amphorae, right, that are used for shipping containers that's a bit strange. We might expect that they are exporting in these shipping containers, but then remember, this region has very little water, so there's very little need to make those containers. Maybe they were exporting in wineskins or even barrels. At the cookingware at Caladino also tells us that the inhabitants are very interested in that old-fashioned Roman cuisine, cooked in those flat-bottom trays or cooked in those big globular pots. We do see some of those casseroles and a few of those baking covers, those newfangled baking covers, make an appearance, but that's not... They're very insignificant compared to what we're seeing at Santa Susana just a generation or two later. We see Santa Susana, it should be filled with those baking covers. And it does have a few, right? It does have 2% rather than 0.3%. But instead, it seems like the inhabitants of Santa Susana are using both the old cooking wares as well as some of the new ones, right? They're fine with doing both. And maybe this is a way of showing that they're the Roman identity, that they are consuming both these traditional recipes, but also baking and in those new clibani, those newfangled ones, here in this region that's still undergoing colonization when Santa Susana is established. So that paper, that went a little longer than I anticipated, but that paper is just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to looking at the materials from sites like Santa Susana and Caladino, and just a kind of a preliminary look at what can be done with the pottery from an archaeological site like these two. I hope you guys are feeling hale and hearty, and I will talk to you again next week.